Welcome to the Darnell and Cody show, where we talk about political and philosophical issues currently relevant to us as a society. Today's topic is Antifa, also known as Anti-Fascists. So before we delve into anti-fascism, let's start with the question, what is fascism? Fascism, according to Merriam-Webster, which I understand isn't the best source when defining ideologies, but bear with me, we are trying to argue on a similar basis of definition to avoid falling into a game of semantics. So, Merriam-Webster dictionary defines fascism as a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader. Severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Or, in general terms, a tendency towards or actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial control. So, what are some examples of fascism that come to mind? Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, the Kims of North Korea. Basically, any dictator spouting any ideology from Nazism to Marxism. In short, ideology doesn't matter in regards to fascism. You can have a fascist dictator in the far right groups like Nazism and Hitler. You can have a fascist dictator in the far left groups like communism and Stalin. Now, I know communism in theory is nothing like what Stalin or any other so called communist states have practiced, but that only goes to show that ideologies are easily weaponized and aren't at the heart of what fascism is about. Fascism is ultimately about one man or an oligarchy controlling a nation. In America, everyone is anti-fascist. The purists on the right are libertarians that want small government and more individual responsibility and civil liberty. Of course, there are white nationalists too, but to lump the entire conservative platform with white nationalism is about as intellectually honest as lumping the left with communism. So what is this group that calls itself Antifa really fighting for? And the answer is obvious. They are literally no different from any other terrorist organization that believe violence is not only tolerable, but essential against those that disagree with them. And the irony is that that sounds like something a fascist would do. What are your thoughts on this, Cody?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's interesting when listening to one of their leaders of the fascist party, Scott Crow, who used to be Antifa organizer. Um, Scott Crow was working with them for over 30 years, and to quote him, he says, "And so we go to cause conflict, to shut them down where they are, because we do not believe the Nazis or fascists of any stripe should have a mouthpiece." And he's basically saying that they're willing to use violence to shut down people's right to speak under the First Amendment. And as you said, this is literally terrorism in America. Um, it's domestic terrorism, and it's excused by many groups, as we'll get into. So I just find it abhorrent that these people kind of hide themselves under the guise of being anti-fascist when, as you said, they are literally using fascist ideology, which is to oppress the people that do not have the same viewpoint as them from even speaking. Um, it's just ironic, and the fact that more people aren't calling it out, I find is very troubling.
Right. It doesn't matter which side you're on. If you're fighting or protesting against free speech, against someone's right to express their opinion, you're doing something not only counterproductive but downright unethical based on everything liberty and the United States is founded upon. And a lot of the Antifa movement actually originated in America from these college campus protests, from having those on the right come and speak on college campuses. So I remember, if I remember correctly, was the first one was Milo Yiannopoulos. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. And I think later on it was someone like Ann Coulter and also Ben Shapiro. Antifa were the first to go around and start protesting these people from speaking. And this is something that I think everyone should be condemning and should be outraged about. Not because they agree with what these speakers are saying, but because everyone should have a right to express their opinion and have a. It's about free speech. Everyone should be protecting another person's free speech. It's like that famous saying, I might not agree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death your right to say it. And I think that's being ignored by these Antifa groups, which is very counterproductive and upsetting, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's literally anti-Americans, anti-democratic, and they're shutting down people's events. As you said, Milo Yiannopoulos, in the case of that instance, where they protested, they ended up causing $100,000 of damage in terms of property damage, including smashing windows and throwing Molotov cocktails through the broken windows and into broken cars. So there's other instances besides the one you mentioned of shutdown events. Political speaker Charles Murray, who's also a political scientist, was shut down from being able to speak due to threats of violence. Brett Weinstein, professor at Evergreen State College, was targeted by Antifa protesters after he came out against the college decision to swap the group of people staying out of class for the day of absence, which purpose originally was to highlight minorities' contribution to the campus by having them stay home for one day, the day of absence. And the campus decided to swap it so that the white people would stay home instead, which literally defeated the purpose of the day of absence, which was what Brett's point was, as well as stating that it was somewhat racist to force white people to stay home when they didn't really have the same kind of social reason to or social justification of protesting as the same as minority groups do. And Brett was literally forced off campus by these threats of violence, and the campus refused to allow police to quell the protesters, and the police actually even came up to Brett Weinstein and informed him that he would not be safe on campus and that he should not return there until the protests had quelled of their own accord, and that there was nothing that they could do about it. So the campus literally just kind of kowtowed to these alt left protesters. I wouldn't even call them alt left, to be honest. They're past that. They're just terrorists, as we said earlier. And another thing that they have shut down, which goes beyond campus grounds, was the 82nd Avenue Rose Parade in Portland. They made threats of violence there, and this parade, after having existed for 81 years, was canceled due to these threats of violence. Many other instances on campus and off campus exist that I could mention. So these people use violence to get their way and to literally stop people from having their right to freedom of speech. And the people that they're stopping from having the right to speak are the people that go through the proper means to get the right to speak. They apply for the permits to get these events, to have these areas set aside for them and to have a stage for themselves and all these things. They have organizers planning these events. There's money that goes into this stuff. And these people don't care about of uh, any of the money, any of their opponents' rights. They just want to use violence to get their way, and that is literally terrorism.
Right. It really comes down to the fact that the left won't accept their own bad actors. Some on the left are so self-righteous that they refuse to believe that their party and its associates can do any wrong. Take, for instance, the Ending the Go case you sort of mentioned there, the assault by Antifa. None of the Democratic presidential candidates besides Andrew Yang and Eric Swalwell condemned those attacks. Take, for instance, the Antifa terrorist attack on the ICE facility, where an Antifa member tried to set an entire building on fire. Did Congresswoman Cortez and her squad condemn the attack? No. When questioned by a reporter, they refused to condemn Antifa. They refused to condemn a terrorist attack on the government facility filled with migrants and civil officers. On the flip side, we can talk about how Trump refused to downright condemn white nationalists that supported him. We could talk about how white nationalists have done horrendous things and how a woman got ran over in Charlottesville and killed not so long ago in the protests. Those are all despicable things that should be condemned by everyone. But the whole point is that we should be better than that. whether you're on the left or the right, we should be better than what we're doing, and not answer in the same kind of ignorance, hatred, and violence, because that's when it all becomes moot and equivalent. You allow the opposition to equivocate its wrongdoings to your wrongdoings, no matter what party you belong to. Antifa is a clear case of this. They are the white nationalists of the left. The only difference is that they have a prettier name and belong on the other side. If the enemy of the KKK was the devil, it doesn't make the devil a good guy. The enemy of my enemy isn't always your friend. You have to go beyond these uh, archaic sayings and archaic way of tribalism and how we innately say, well, my team is the best team and my team is always right no matter what they're doing. We have to really look at the problems we have. If there's a problem we have with what another person believes or what another person is trying to accomplish, then we should have a real dialogue about that. And that's what the beauty of this country is, that we can, and it's in our rights to have a dialogue. And the fact that our politicians, the media, and just the people in general can't honestly discuss this is very troubling, and I think it's signs of bad things to come unless we address this right on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I first want to address the case of Andy Nago, who I actually didn't believe I mentioned with the names I mentioned earlier. This is a recent event that just happened in Portland, Oregon, once again, where Antifa seems to have a pretty strong presence. Protesters literally mugged this journalist who is a conservative reporter in terms of their views. I wouldn't even say he's a conservative or that he's really working for conservative news, but he does report on Antifa's activities prior to this and has reported on other things that have come out badly for the liberals. So people have targeted him for this reason. Even though he is a second generation American whose parents migrated from Vietnam, and he has come out as a gay American after he graduated from college. He's literally one of the perfect examples of someone they claim to defend by being a racial minority as well as a gay person. He's someone that they claim is opposed or oppressed by the government and the institutions that exist now, and yet they will go after him simply because they claim that he is working as a someone who is going against their beliefs essentially. And it just goes to show that they're uh, literally willing to stoop to any level to get what they want. And there have been reports that during this mugging, which you can even watch on YouTube, it was filmed. Um, Although you can't see police in the video, I have read uh, reports, especially local reports from Oregon, in which they say that the police presence there, especially around the park where he was mugged, was surrounded by police before and after the mugging. So there was a police presence there, and they did not interfere or intervene with him being attacked. And when I say mugged, I mean he was literally punched in the face, then batoned by somebody, and then after that they started spraying stuff into his face and throwing milkshakes in the into his face and at his person, at the back of his head and stuff like that. And the police had reported that these milkshake containers were actually full of quick drying cement, which can cause chemical burns as well as other serious body damage, especially if it gets in your eyes or something like that. So these people might as well have been throwing uh, some kind of acid at him or something. Although it wasn't very strong, it still could have caused permanent damage to his body. And they bruised him very badly to the point where he actually had bleeding within his brain. And it's just so interesting that, like Darnell was saying, the liberal spin on this, or I wouldn't say all liberals, because a lot of liberals are condemning this behavior. But you have CNN, which is one of the strongest liberal reporting media in America right now. And you go to their website, and it literally has a website on what Antifa is, and it tries to explain their use of violence without condemning it at all. And they say that white nationalists and alt-right denounce it, but they don't mention the fact that liberals and moderates and Republicans that aren't white nationalists or alt-right are also condemning it. And you can look at any kind of international reporting on the incident that happened, especially with Andy, to find out how people are really viewing the situation. Um, People internationally are reporting on the fact that this is terrorist group attacking somebody and trying to silence somebody for uh, their beliefs and their ideology. And so CNN is just trying to mask this in some way that it doesn't seem justified for why they're doing this. But as Darnell said, it's like they just don't want to be associated with the fact that maybe people on the left are also bad players, and that they're not willing to call out their bad players as they should be calling them out. And there's many other people, such as this American historian and cultural critic named Ruth Ben Gott, and she's been writing for CNN and The Atlantic for several years. And to quote her, she said, "Throwing a milkshake does not equivalent killing someone, but because people in power are allied with the right, any provocation backfires." And she's literally trying to make an excuse for violence there and saying that just because it's not killing them, it's fine, basically. Because the alt right and the KKK have killed people in the past, although in recent history there has only been one instance of that. And so it just seems like everyone is trying to make an excuse where they can and not pointing their finger where it should be pointing at bad actors, literally terrorists. So what are your thoughts on that, Darnell?
Right. You can't kill anybody as long as just give them some internal bleeding in the brain. Right. That's the standard. That's the limit. It's really asinine. It's insane to even make that kind of argument. What's bad is bad, and to try to justify, it's like you see one of those parents that try to justify their children's bad behavior and say, well, at least he's not a serial killer. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, there's a standard of bad, and bad is bad. Just accept that and try to address it and correct that instead of trying to spoil and try to protect your child into this perfect image that you have of him. And what's most upsetting about the attack on Andy Go is that he was a journalist. He was just there to report. He wasn't there to protest against Antifa. He wasn't there to do anything. He wasn't there to express his opinion about anything. He was just there to report what's happening. And for CNN, which is a news organization themselves, was part of the media, to kind of take Antifa's side on this, as is kind of what it seems like. They're trying to, make it seem tame and okay. It's crazy. Imagine if next time CNN tried to cover something that let's say white nationalists, let's say the KKK are having a protest or whatever, white nationalists having a protest, and CNN sends their journalist in, and he gets viciously attacked by them, gets thrown, what you said, what was it, dried cement or wet cement, quick drying cement, and are getting whacked in the head with batons and punched and sucker punched, and has his camera broken, has internal brain damage and bleeding. I wonder if they'll be reporting in the same way, this same flavor and twist as they're reporting this attack. It's downright disgusting. It's a case of not even looking out for their own. It's a clear case of them serving their political ideology and not the just general ethics and general well-being of the public and their own members of their own profession.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I'm much less. I mean, even if he's not a reporter, he's literally just there. Like, who cares if he's recording something? Like, this guy wasn't trying to cause any kind of conflict. A lot of people have been trying to say, like, he brought this upon himself in some way, or he was asking for it. I mean, what kind of world do we live in where you show up somewhere and there's a bunch of people that disagree with you, so somehow, like, that leads to you getting beaten? Like, that's not how uh, arguments work. That's not how discussions work. That's not how solutions get come upon. That's not how civil people behave in general. You don't just beat up someone who disagrees with you ideology-wise, or what if it's someone of a different religion? Do you just, like, beat the crap out of someone because they have a different religion than you? Oh, I mean, how tribal are we gonna start behaving, and we're making excuses for the tribalism? It just seems absolutely so wrong to me that, as you said, that CNN and other liberal media, they're just not reporting on this in the proper light. And honestly, as much as I am usually a critic of Fox News, I think that they're the ones who are being the most honest about Antifa right now. Um, they're the ones who are, interviewing Andy and getting his side of the story. They're shedding light on what's happening with their protesting, showing videos of how these guys dress up in all black with ninja hoods on or like masks around their face and all this crazy stuff. And they're all typically armed. And people always talk about how the white nationalists and the all right protesters show up armed to the teeth with like batons and shields and whatnot. Well, Antifa does the exact same thing. And like you were saying earlier, just because someone is being, like a bad contender in the political sphere, I would say like all right. I wouldn't say all right, but white nationalists in particular, they're bad contenders. They're just bad players. They don't follow the same rules that we do, so they bring weapons. And that's not the way that we should behave just because they behave that way. Michelle Obama is highly known for her quote, "When they go low, we go high." And that's not what the Antifa does. They literally do the opposite of that. And the liberals, for the most part, it seems like don't follow Michelle Obama's words. They just kind of excuse this behavior. And I just find that very, very troubling from the same party that is so critical of the alt right and especially the white nationalists and the KKK and the like. But yet they have people of their own side that are semi organized terrorist groups, multi celled, admittedly, because there's no central organized Antifa, but there's lots of little groups across the country. And they're just not willing to call it out in the same way, or even really admit that it's a problem within their own party. And like I said, it's just very hypocritical.
Right. And I never thought I'd hear the day when you say something positive about Fox, but that's how bad it's gotten. Like I agree, it's gotten to a point where anyone that's intellectually honest has to admit that this is what's happening. It doesn't matter if you're in the left or right. Anybody that's intellectually honest on the right are saying that, look, we don't condone white nationalists. We don't want them here. We don't want them on our side. So it's time for people on the left to also come out and say, look, we don't agree with these Antifa extremists. We don't agree with what they're saying, what their methods especially. We can agree with what they're saying, but their methods are drastic. It's wrong. It's everything that's against a productive conversation and dialogue. If you want to accomplish something, I think Martin Luther King and other peaceful protesters and peaceful people that are willing to have real dialogues and something of a real civil conversation, they've accomplished more than people that are committed to violence, like Al Qaeda. What has Al Qaeda really accomplished but caused xenophobia, Islamophobia, and the poor conception of Muslims everywhere? It's really about representing yourself eloquently, but more so civilly and in a way that we are all able to come together and really just talk about the issue rather than literally screaming, rioting, and throwing stuff at each other. It's like, let's imagine you're trying to have a debate, formal debate, and one side is trying to present facts, statistics. It could even be a little bit of emotional appeal there too. And the other side is throwing rocks, setting stuff on fire, and screaming loudly. Which side is the reasonable side here? clearly the former, and I think that's what we should be striving for as a nation, as a group of people, as people that are able to have civilization and have something that's more than just chimps throwing rocks at each other and whacking each other with sticks. Let's be civil. Let's have that dialogue. Let's move together. Let's move forward. Let's progress. Let's not devolve into this primitive form of problem solving, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you disagree with Betsy DeVos or Ben Shapiro, whoever the heck it is, that shows up at a college campus, don't just try and get the event shut down. How about you hold your own event, maybe even a week or two later, so that people that went to that event can also come to your event? And then you can try and respond to what they said with your own viewpoint. And really, that's the beauty of how our system works, is the good ideas are going to prevail as long as we're allowed to hear them. And under the Constitution, we're supposed to be allowed to hear them. So just trying to solve things by shutting people down and with violence is literally just anti-American. And I just am shocked by how much leniency they get in terms of what they do. People just don't react the same way that if an alt-right group was doing this, or if the KKK was doing this, shutting down public events in college campus speakers, especially people that are of the president's own cabinet, like Betsy DeVos. Like, that's insane that someone can shut down an event at a college campus for someone that works for the president. These people have that much power because of how much leniency they get. It's just not right, and it's downright un-American.
Right. Nobody's asking for you to hold Betsy's hand and sing Kumbaya. No, nobody's asking you to love her or agree with her idea. Just be civil enough to hear her out, or let other people hear. If you don't want to hear, you can just stay home. Nobody's forcing you to come out. Give people the right to speak because they have a right to speak. It doesn't matter what if you disagree with them. They have that right to speak, and violence is never the answer unless it's in self-defense. And yeah, I think that's about it for this topic. Unless you have something to add, Cody.
No, that's it for me.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thanks very much.